Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online and in-person program titled Mothers and Fathers of the Digital Archive, the Endangered Archives Program in Iquitos, Peru. Tonight's program is co-presented and co-hosted by the American Trust for the British Library. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and host the program this evening. Now, for those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and book topics relating to libraries and archives like the one this evening. Now, if you're not a member or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest and the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the book club. And now tonight's program. Again, the program is titled Mothers and Fathers of the Digital Archive, the Endangered Archives Program in Iquitos, Peru. Our speakers are Amanda M. Smith and Sydney M. Silverstein. Amanda M. Smith is Associate Professor of Latin American Literature and Culture at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Her research explores cultural responses to environmental crises in Latin America with a particular emphasis on Amazonian and Andean contexts. Professor Smith is co-editor of the Journal of Latin American Cultural Studies and co-director of an Endangered Archives Program grant to digitize the newspaper collections of the Biblioteca Amazónica in Iquitos, Peru. Sydney M. Silverstein is an anthropologist, a mom, that's my favorite part of this description, and assistant professor of population and public health sciences at the Wright State University Boonshoft School of Medicine in southwestern Ohio. Her scholarship explores the diverse social worlds that come together around the production, circulation, use, and policing of illicit drugs. She conducts research in both Peru and North America on topics as diverse as coca cultivation, drug overdose prevention, addiction treatment and recovery, and the role of the criminal justice system in managing substance abuse disorders. Since 2020, she has collaborated with Amanda Smith on a series of projects, including the Endangered Archives Program grant that they're going to be talking about this evening. Tonight, they will be talking about their work to create an open access digital archive of materials housed at the Biblioteca Amazónica. Now, if you have questions for our speakers, please wait until the end of the presentation. We will have time to take questions. We'll take them from you here in the club rooms, and we'll take them from the folks out on Zoom. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom. They should both be enabled, and you can pose your questions there, and I'll come back and we'll curate questions from both of those locations. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Amanda M. Smith and Sydney M. Silverstein. Come on up. Oh, I'll advance it and do the first slide.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know what the order for that was, but I'm happy to do it.
That was the British Library person.
Okay. We have a sound problem. We thought this might happen. I'm going to pause him. This worked in our rehearsal. I know you probably hear that a lot, but it's true. It did. It really did work. Let me see if I can get back to the Zoom controls. I'm not sure where I can do that. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to restart it.
EAP, I think I know.
You know where it could be.
Share.
I'm already in share, so I have to stop.
Oh, yeah, stop share, so it's just hidden from you.
Oh,
At the bottom of the screen. Or the top. Go to the top. There it is.
let's see if we can get this. Let's see if we can just do it from here.
I think you have to stop share and then.
Yeah, that's what we got. We're gonna stop the share and restart it so we can connect our sound, reconnect our sound,
Share sound.
optimize, go from there. And now let's give this another try. What do you say?
Hello, I'm Sam Van Skyke. I'm the head of the Endangered Archives program at the British Library, and I'd like to thank the American Trust for the British Library and the Book Club of California for inviting me to say a few words before the discussions with Dr. Smith and Dr. Silverstein about their EAP project. EAP has been running at the British Library since 2004. With grants from the philanthropic trust Arcadia, and we celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. Our funding currently runs through to 2033. And so far, we've funded over 500 projects across the world to engage in digital preservation. The images resulting from these projects have been deposited in the countries of the project and with us at the British Library, and are available on the British Library website at eap.bl.uk. Last year, along with the EAP curator Jodie Butterworth, I published an article in Preservation in Perspective, a recent volume on the history and changes to EAP over the last 2 decades. So if anyone's interested in reading further on that, this is available on an open access basis. So what do we mean when we say endangered archives? For EAP, endangered means material that's at risk of loss, decay, or destruction, and is in countries where resources, funding, and opportunities to preserve the material is lacking or limited. And by archives, we have a very wide definition referring to materials in written, pictorial, and audio formats, which includes manuscripts, printed books, documents, newspapers, and much more, which I'll show a few examples of in a moment. We fund 3 levels of projects of varying maximum length and budget limits, pilot projects, which are mainly explorations or surveys, major projects, which are the majority of our digitization projects, and then occasionally area projects, which range across a wider territory and look at a greater mass of material and therefore have a larger budget. Our funding decisions are made by an external advisory panel that meets once a year. And they look at primarily the content of the archive itself in terms of its endangerment, its research and cultural value, the age of the material. And for EAP, that means we will cover anything that runs up to the middle of the 20th century. For later material, there is also the Modern Endangered Archives program based at UCLA. And we look at ethical issues. So the key thing for assessing any application to us is to make sure that the custodians of the original material are happy with the project. They're happy with the digitization, and they're also okay with things being made available online. And if they're not, then obviously we wouldn't want the project to go forward. And then, of course, we assess the team and the plan, and we look at the principal applicant, the skills and expertise to not only to digitize, but also to be able to provide cataloging or metadata on the images, and then any travel that's needed, which we do try to keep to a minimum, equipment, which must stay in the country, and then training and capacity building. Now, in terms of things that are the kind of material basis of EAP projects, we have the kind of classical archives, and here's an example of that, the archives of the Zoology Department of the National Museums of Kenya. We have newspapers, which I think you'll hear more about a bit later. There's also manuscripts. Here's a illustrated manuscript from Nepal. And we have photography. And this is an example of a glass slide from India. Finally, we also have sound. So any sound archives that's on a material basis that comes from the mid-20th century or earlier is also eligible for EAP funding. So anything on things like shellac, even wax discs, can be recorded digitally and become part of the EAP collections. Training is an important part of the projects. It's not just, EAP projects are not intended for teams to kind of fly in, do digitization and fly out again, but training and capacity building very much go together. So training of local teams who will do digitization, cataloging, project management work, and hopefully be able to use those skills in further projects and further work. So in the book Remote Capture, which I showed on the previous slide, there's various advice, diagrams, possible equipment to use for digitization projects. And these apply not just to EAP, but any kind of remote or difficult conditions for digitization. So here's one example from the book, which is also available on open access. One example of a setup for digitization with the camera and lights. And here's a photograph of a team in action in Mali doing digitization with a small camera setup. Now, the end product of all of this is for the material to be made available. As I mentioned earlier, the original files in archival TIFF format are stored in an archival partner in the country of the project, and another copy is sent to the British Library. We make these available through lower resolution copies via our website. Each project has its own page on the website, and you can see one here showing the details of the project lead and their institution and their funding. And then when you click through that, you can get to the actual collections themselves, which are sorted here, as you can see, on an archival system. And then clicking through that, you'll come to the images themselves. And we ask for 300 DPI images. This provides the quality to make them accessible online through this viewer where they can be zoomed into high enough detail to read. And the viewer itself is the universal viewer, and this is based on the IIIF system, which allows the images to be embedded elsewhere, so they're not just stuck on the British Library website, but they can be embedded in other resources. We make them available on a non-commercial Creative Commons basis, so any request for them to be used for commercial purposes, we would pass back to the custodians of the original collections, but they are made freely available for research and enjoyment on our website. So thank you very much. That was just a brief, hopefully brief enough introduction from me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening.
This. Okay, just making sure that Everyone there on Zoom should be seeing the full slide now. Oh, he's still talking. Oh, he's almost done. He went big again, but he has nothing more to say. I think he's going to stop here. So now on Zoom, you should be seeing the full slide, not presenter view, not anything else. And here you should be able to see what you need to see for presenter view. So
Great.
our speakers, come on up.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for having us. Iquitos is the largest city in the world that cannot be reached by land, by road. Sitting some 2,000 miles up the Amazon River from the Atlantic Ocean, Iquitos is the capital of Loreto, the largest but least populated political department in Peru. To reach Iquitos, one must travel by air or by river. To accommodate its peculiar form of accessibility, Iquitos has a fairly large international airport for a city of its size, nearly 500,000 people according to the most recent census. Planes arrive from national transportation hubs and occasionally, depending on economic boom or bust, from Panama City or Miami. The flight to Peru's capital city and commercial center, Lima, is just over an hour, and if you can plan ahead, it's not terribly expensive. For those who do not have a phobia of air travel and can save enough money for a ticket, flying presents a much quicker and convenient alternative than the 3 days of river travel and nearly 24 hours by bus it would take to reach Lima by land. For those who cannot afford air travel, need to travel with cargo, or just prefer the adventure and pace of river travel, large mixed cargo ships known as lanchas depart daily from ports of Masusa, Henry, and Pesqueros every few days, heading up the Amazon towards Yurimaguas or down the Ucayali towards Pucallpa. There, passengers may disembark and travel overland to destinations along the coast and mountains. I've blown out my voice a bit yelling at the Warriors game the other day. Excuse me. Amanda and I both made this trip in 2013, but since we were not yet friends or colleagues, I can only tell you my version of the story. Before departing Yurimaguas, I had mixed feelings about this journey. The idea of sailing down the Amazon is one that has received much fanfare in tourist accounts and travel literature. And while I was careful not to impose too many of these romantic notions of Amazonian river travel, I did arrive at the port with a set of expectations about my fellow passengers, whom I imagined to be mostly poor regional folks who had likely never been on an airplane and relied on lanchas for the few trips they would make in and out of Iquitos in a lifetime. I also anticipated having to avoid the iconic mochileros, the dreadlocked backpackers touring the Peru exotic, on their way to a grand finale of an ayahuasca journey somewhere deep in the jungle with a charlatan effectively masquerading as a shaman. Fortunately, travel anxieties were shelved almost immediately after boarding the boat. We set sail on a Wednesday on a boat named after its captain, Don Anaco. There were about 30 human passengers, 101 pigs, and 80 cows. My travel company, livestock aside, was a pleasant and interesting group. A pair of brothers sailing to French Guiana for work in and around a space station, an aging, eccentric, well-read Marxist with his own television show called Debate Politico, who claimed to have met both Elvis and Michael Jackson, and a man en route to an Israelite community another day's travel past Iquitos by boat, where he had migrated after reading an inspiring religious verse living in Cajamarca. The makeup of my company is a fitting introduction to the strange sort of international cosmopolitanism that is characteristic of Iquitos. The life journeys of my fellow passengers, and those were just the 5 that talked to me, had led them throughout the Americas in search of love, labor, and God. In their own ways, each of these men was woven into international webs of commerce, where space travel, journalism, and religion linked them to global circulations of money and ideas. That I met these men traveling on a riverboat is even more significant, since Iquitos has been a global city since its inception. Constructed as a steamship port linking Europe with Peru's Amazonian region in the 19th century, Iquitos was formed as a city out of global flows of people and resources, largely stemming from its famous rubber boom. When the global demand for Amazonian rubber subsided, however, Iquitos remained characterized by the comings and goings of people and goods from far-off places. The change was who was coming and why.
So what brought us both to Iquitos originally were sort of similar but different reasons. We were both doing research for our PhDs. Sydney was doing anthropological work on some of the things that Kevin mentioned earlier. But part of that trip, she also went into the archive, the Biblioteca Amazónica, which is the second most important archive in the world for Amazonian resources, and found images like these. So speaking of travel narratives and how people arrive to the Amazon, you know, the discourse that has sort of dominated this region for many years has been these voyages of discovery and evangelization. So you'll find images like these in the archives. It says Father Ismail with the semi-savages, recently baptized and accompanied by their godfathers. So these kinds of narratives really dominate how we think of the Amazon. This is not from the Peruvian Amazon, but this is Roosevelt on a famous expedition to find the source of the Duda River. It's a hyper-masculinized person. And we also just wanted to share with you, it's a quick clip. I don't know if you've seen the film Burden of Dreams. It's the making of Fitzcarraldo by Werner Herzog. And the way he describes the Amazon in this very short clip is very indicative of how a lot of outsiders think of this region. And it's sort of the discourse that we're trying to push back against with our project. So we just want to play it with you for you briefly. Maybe. Perhaps. Here we go. We won't play the whole thing.
Herzog is stranded in the jungle with a 300-ton steamship that won't move, and time is running out. He needs money to move the ship, but no one will invest unless the ship moves first. Behind his back, some of the actors are talking about getting out while the getting is good. Only a few of the cast, crew, and Indians believe in his dream anymore. Even Herzog is beginning to wonder.
Of course, we are challenging nature itself, and it hits back. It just hits back, that's all, and that's grandiose about it, and we have to accept that it is much stronger than we are. Kinski always says it's full of erotic elements. I don't see it so much erotic, I see it more full of obscenity. It's just, and nature here is vile and base. I wouldn't see anything erotical here. I would see fornication and asphyxiation and choking and fighting for survival and growing and just rotting away. Of course, there's a lot of misery, but it is the same.
So we'll stop there, but I think this kind of gives you this sort of outsider exotic take on the Amazon. I think these slides are a little out of order. I was in the Amazon the first time for my doctoral dissertation, which later became my book, and I was trying to trace down the biography of this man, Manuel Cordoba, who had been a famous healer in Iquitos and was the subject of a very famous novel that we'll show you at the end of the presentation. And so I was using the archive there to try to find details about his life, because his life story is that he was kidnapped by an indigenous tribe and made their leader, a little bit apocryphal. And so I wanted to know what the more likely story was. So I remember being in this archive and having the archivist there, Julio Ramirez, who's now part of our team, hand me documents that were just completely damaged. Sometimes he couldn't hand me what I wanted to see because it was too damaged. But the pages in this archive, it's not climatized. It's in the middle of the Amazon jungle. As you can imagine, it's very humid. So the humidity, some of the pages are molding. The objects that they have there are molding. There's also rodents in all of these buildings in Iquitos, both bats and rats and things that tend to eat the pages. So years later, when I was at UC Santa Cruz, a friend of mine who had been working at UC Santa Cruz, Rachel Dublinger, got this job for this new fund, which, as was mentioned, was out of the same fund as the Arcadia Fund, the Modern Endangered Archives program at UCLA. And she was leaving to direct this program. And she said, hey, I don't know if you know of any archives that are endangered. And of course, the first thing that came to my mind was this Biblioteca Amazónica. And so part of the, it's quite a long story about the application that we will skip over, but part of the application, you have to show evidence that people have been using this archive. So you prepare a list of publications that have been prepared, that have been, written and published based on the materials in the archive. And so there's a sort of listserv for people who study Amazonia in our major professional organization. And so I had reached out to say, hey, has anyone published anything that I can add to this bibliography? And I didn't know Sydney at the time. And she wrote me back and said, hey, I haven't published anything, but I've used the archive and I can help you out. And Sydney lived in Iquitos for 18 months. I had only spent, a few weeks there, here and there. And so I was super grateful to have her. She was definitely necessary in those early stages and still. So the first fund we got was this Modern Endangered Archives program. And that was supposed to be 2 years, but it ended up being more like 3 because of, pandemic, got us a late start. And for this project, we digitized photographs, much like the ones we showed you earlier. We digitized maps, local periodicals, like journals. And we actually met each other for the first time in Lima at the airport. This is us being exhausted and trying to get our caffeine in. We got yelled at for being seated outside the airport shortly after taking this picture. Do you want to talk or do you want, how's your voice?
Yeah, I think you can keep going.
Okay, you jump in. So we made it to Lima and we had to bring a lot of supplies with us. And it was, one of the things we had to bring was a copy stand, and it has this really tall arm. And so I bought like ski luggage to get it down. I didn't know how else to get it down. So I bought like a ski suitcase, and that did the trick. And then I sent the other half of it, which was the base, to Sydney. And she did a very improvised packaging for that, and it got lost. So we went to Iquitos, about a few hours after this picture was taken, and we didn't have all our equipment, and we only had 5 or 6 days to set up for this project, to train our team, to get everything set up, and to leave them to do the work. Because as was mentioned in the video, the idea or the spirit behind these Arcadia funds is that the people that are local to the archives are actually the ones who are doing the work and learning how to be custodians of their own materials. So we spent several days doing what we could and training the team. And then finally, this is Sydney happily picking up the copy stand, and we'll talk about the stuffed animals, which is very important to our talk today in a second. But this is Sydney picking up the copy stand at the airport. And then this is us with some members of our original team finally setting this copy stand up in this room in the library. You want to talk about the stuffies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I'll just go really quickly with our team. So again, I know it sounds a little bit of a stretch from my research, like I do kind of standard public health stuff now, but I'm trained as an anthropologist. And originally when I did my dissertation work, I was really interested in the kind of like tensions between traditional usages of coca and then this kind of like global commodity chain of cocaine use. And so I thought there was actually kind of an interesting metaphor there with Iquitos being a city in the Amazon. Like people think of the Amazon as this very exotic indigenous place where people go for ayahuasca journeys and ecotourism. But when I started spending time in Iquitos, I realized, well, it's really kind of a city with very urban problems, including issues of homelessness and substance use and illicit drug use. And so when I first was in the archive, I was kind of curious about like the formation of the city, its history, its connection to these circuits of kind of indigenous tourism, but also global extractive industry and commerce in its own kind of cosmopolitan scene. So I did some preliminary field work in the archive. That's how I knew the collection. But then when I was there for my longer stint, there was an anthropology program at the local campus of the National University. And so they didn't at the time have any full-time cultural anthropologists as faculty there. And so I did a lot with the students. I would talk to them about field work or find articles for them. And I would give a lot of talks, or just, I was friendly with them. And so when we were trying to think of a team, the first people that came to mind were those students. And again, in Iquitos, a lot of people, because they have family responsibilities and jobs, they're not a college student, 18, living in a dorm. A lot of them were in their 20s and going to school part-time. And so our initial team was made up almost exclusively of anthropology students. I think they all were. Yeah. So this is the initial team. So there's this, you know, as we mentioned, or we've a few times, this narrative of explorers, you know, conquering the Amazon and moving through this dark, fornicating place to find their dream, or like extracting rubber. And so I think what's kind of funny is that both of us came maybe with that narrative in our heads. We had a very different experience of coming there, one that was much more welcoming and matriarchal, and sort of and actually a place where we both really comfortable. But when we were preparing for this grant and to travel for the first time to bring the equipment, it was the pandemic. And so we had our trip planned in the Omicron era, and then we had to postpone it because of Omicron. So when we finally were getting prepared to go on our first trip in May of 2022, we were making all these plans, you know, getting together the equipment, all this coordination stuff with the team, how we're going to train them. And then at one point, Amanda and I have children that are the same age. She has twins that are maybe 3 months older than mine. So at the time, our children were five or six.
Yeah.
And at one point, I said to Amanda, "What's the longest time you've ever been away from your kids?" And she said, 3 days. And she was like, "How about you?" And I was like, 3 days. And we realized we were planning this whole trip, and we were both very excited to go, but it was the first time also either of us were going to be traveling from our rather small children, and also the first big trip after the pandemic. And I don't know if any of you, you know, have had that sensation of kind of going out in the world after a long lockdown, but at a certain point, the excitement of the trip also became tangled up in a lot of anxiety about, you know, leaving our children and traveling. And so it was a very different kind of journey. We were excited to go and train, but we were both also very anxious. And so each of us decided as a plan, we'd bring along stuffed animals of our children and photograph the animals wherever we went and send the pictures back to our kids as a way of staying connected. And that, again, Amanda and I have spent a lot of time talking on the phone or exchanging messages, but we haven't spent much time sharing physical space together. And I think we really connected as mothers and with these anxieties and also this excitement to train the team. And I want to bring this up today because this kind of concept or notion of motherhood, doesn't have to gender it in like for a female, but the kind of nurturing care work, it was also existing in tension with work we had to do in Iquitos with the vicariate with a series of priests. And I think both of us were pretty well experienced in Latin American culture. You know, I'm an anthropologist. Amanda's a scholar of literature. She's also lived in Peru and studied languages. And so both of us were very accustomed to negotiating and sharing space with Peruvians, but neither of us were prepared for the priests, the fathers, which is to say that it's so, I mean, even to this day, our level of ignorance is so bad that when we created the flyer for this talk, we sent it in and they said, "Oh, is that Pope John Paul?" And I said, "I think so." "Amanda, is that Pope John Paul?" She said, I'm not sure. So my husband, who's kind of a lapsed Catholic, I said, "Nick, is that John Paul?" And he said, "How do you not know? That's the most recognizable Pope. Of course it's John Paul." So we're a little bit like, for all our kind of cultural competence and things Amazonian, we were not prepared to deal with the priests and the fathers. And so it became another layer in our journey.
So, I mean, maybe we forgot to say that the custodians of this archive are the Catholic Church in Iquitos. And that's sort of true about a lot of cultural initiatives in the region. It's sort of a region that was evangelized, as you saw in the earlier photograph. And it's a region that doesn't get a lot of support from the federal government. And so often the de facto cultural custodians end up being these priests from the Catholic Church, and they're all Spanish. They're all Spanish priests. So there's even sort of like a layer of colonialism built in there as well. They're Spanish priests who have lived in Iquitos for decades and decades. But it is a very different, we have a very different approach to the archive than they do. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. And so we're sort of talking about two things. We're going to share with you the materials that we're actually preserving, but we also wanted to emphasize that, you know, part of this experience has been you know, learning what it means sort of culturally to care for objects in an archive and what it means to involve local people in that process. Do you want to say something? So we took this trip. We sent our kids all the stuffy pictures. They were totally into it. And then we left, that was in May 2022. And then October 2022, there was a fire in the archives. So speaking of, you know, what makes these places endangered archives, the wiring in this building was incredibly outdated. It's a 19th century building. It was a sort of series of unfortunate events that constellated to cause this fire. There were extreme high temperatures. There was a power outage that happened. When the power came back on, there was a short circuit. And there was a surge protector where some of our equipment was plugged in, and it was positioned right below a dripping air conditioner. And so a lot of things kind of came together, or didn't, I guess, but to cause this tragedy. Luckily, not that many archival materials were very damaged. Most of the damage happened from the water when the firefighters came in. This is an image of some people from our team and others coming in to sort of dry off the materials. I learned a lot during this process. There's a 24/7 emergency line. Maybe you know about this already, but there's a 24/7 emergency line for archival disasters that I was able to talk to somebody immediately, and they told me exactly what needed to be done as a sort of triage in the aftermath. And the sort of, you know, the bittersweet thing about this was obviously a tragedy that happened in the middle of our project, but at the same time, this sort of thing happens in these buildings all the time in Iquitos, not just this one. And because we had formed this team of young people who were working on this project, they all were able to show up and sort of, you know, all hands on deck situation in the immediate aftermath of the fire. So this is also just a picture of our team and their UC Santa Cruz t-shirts. And this is kind of how our team started. It was very masculine in the beginning, and that dynamic has definitely changed. We have had 3 or 4 young mothers on our team. 4 young mothers on our team.
2 mothers and then 2 births.
Yeah, 2 mothers. Yeah. So 4 mothers altogether. 2 of them gave birth while working on our team. And so we were able to sort of like.
Not in the archive.
Not in the archive. We don't work them that hard. But
They became pregnant over the course of the grant work, had their babies, and then came back and worked on the teams.
And we were able to sort of incorporate a maternity leave, you know, pretty flexibly into our work. And that was really important to us because we wanted them, all of these team members are a big part of our team. And so, you know, we wanted them to have the freedom to live their lives and parent and mother. We actually brought Susan, who's here, we brought a breast pump down for her when we came down to visit. And you know, so we have this very maternal sort of relationship with the team, and it's quite different than the sort of priest relationship both to the archive and the team. And we've even been accused of being too maternal. I was in a meeting with some of the priests and somebody from the National Library in Peru who's been helping us with sort of quality control of the items that they're digitizing. And she told me that I was like the long distance mother who spoils her children out of guilt. And so I don't think she's necessarily wrong, but it's an interesting accusation that sort of came into the conversation unprovoked. And the priests have said the same thing to us, that they think we spoil the team, and it's because we just have a different approach. So every time our team makes a milestone, Sydney and I will send money of our own down so that they can go out and celebrate, because we really wanted to make sure that there was esprit de corps, and also that the people on the team felt like they were part of something important and that we were really rooting for them, because we are, and celebrating all of the work that they've done.
Yeah. And part of it too, I mean, this is an archive of largely vernacular materials, right? I mean, it's stuff that was published there. So in both the Modern Endangered Archives program and later the Endangered Archives program, the emphasis is on materials that don't exist in another collection. So periodicals, magazines that were published just in Iquitos, photographs, maps. And I will say, like, we've talked a bit about the priest, but the original priest that was who had the archive was a beloved figure to our families. When they moved, they would entrust entire collections of vernacular photographs. He was a cultural ambassador. Anyone in the humanities or social sciences who did research, he would help out anyone. He was a great person. He, by the time we started the project, had dementia. So we sort of dealt with his successors who were maybe a little less invested or didn't have the historical connection, but the materials we digitized were vernacular. And part of the reason why it was very important for us to have this team, it was a source of tension with the priests, because oftentimes they wanted people from the church to work on the project, which was understandable because it's you sort of in-house, but we felt very much like this is an archive of vernacular materials that tells the story of the city of Iquitos and the surrounding regions. It has to become, it's a public access archive. These are not people who are going to go on the UCLA website per se. So people who have to understand what's in this collection and know about using it have to be local people. And so it's important for us to have team members who were students, and it grew beyond anthropology. We had some who were in different kinds of, studying project management or information systems, but it was all local youth. And to train them and to give them familiarity with the archive was deeply important, because it's these vernacular collections. Like, yes, it's great that the Book Club of California can access this. It's great that researchers like Sidney Silverstein and Amanda Smith can, but also these are images that belong to people. They belong to families. These are maps that tell the stories of the formalization of territories that were once ancestral lands. So they belong there. And it was very important for us that people outside of these kind of elite spaces like the university and the church understand them. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the materials now to kind of give you a sense of what was in the collection, and to see why it was kind of important for us to maintain a relationship, not just with the vicariate who was in charge of the collection, but also create connections with local universities, students, research institutes. And so we finished MEEP in 2024.
Yeah, I think so.
And when we were finishing, I think I had taken a trip down to Iquitos, and I had gone with Julio, the librarian, and sort of to see like, well, okay, we're finishing the MEEP grant. There's clearly a lot of materials left. Like, if we can look for more money, what would be the priority things? And he showed me this collection of newspapers. And it was like, again, everyone's heard of the rubber boom in Peru. I mean, if you go to the cemetery in Peru, there's gravestones with people born in Morocco, China, France, Palestine. I mean, it's really interesting. And there's these amazing collection of newspapers that were published in Iquitos. They exist nowhere else. And they're just wrapped in butcher paper with moths circulating around them. And so we miraculously found the British Library grant, which prioritizes materials from the first half of the 20th century, including things like newspapers. So we're going to just show you a few samples.
So these are some samples, and also when we finished off this project, we had to file a report with UCLA. And I think it was your idea, actually. Sydney's idea was to actually have the team members comment on the archival materials and what it was like to sort of, be in community with these objects. And so we're just going to read you some excerpts from what our team said about this, so you can get a sense of, why it was so important for us to have these young people working on the team and sort of getting to know their cultural heritage in this firsthand way. So this,
I think you want this
oh,
one.
did I skip one?
Well, no, I think we're just.
Oh, okay,
You're
gotcha.
good.
Yeah. So this is what we're digitizing now with the British Library grant. These newspapers, it's El Eco, La Razón, and another one called El Oriente. And these were very important publications during the time of the rubber boom. They're chocked full of information, and they'll soon be available digitally worldwide. In our previous grant, one of the things we mentioned was the photography collection, and there's in the photography collection, there's sub-collections, and this is one called Padre Joaquin Events. So Father Joaquin Events, and Father Joaquin is the one that we were mentioning earlier, was sort of the original custodian of the Biblioteca Amazónica, very well loved, and it was his dream actually to digitize the library. And so another priest who we've been working with, Miguel Fuertes, was the one who reached out to me and said, can we work on this digitization grant? This is what Father Joaquin wanted. So this is from whose excerpt is? Oh, this is from Cristian Awanaritamani, who's one of our team members, and he says, in the collection Eventos Padre Joaquin, each old photograph tells a story. For instance, these images tell about the Loreto Book Fair, meetings between distinguished authorities, congresses, art exhibitions, but above all, events presided over by Father Joaquin Garcia Sanchez, one of the region's most important cultural ambassadors. Exploring old photographs is an enriching way to travel back in time and connect with the past. I invite you to immerse yourself in these images and other collections where you can discover the stories and cultures that represent our beloved Loreto region. Loreto is the state that Iquitos is in. And Christian is a sort of, he joined us in the meet, but towards the end, and he's a very, he's a young student studying business administration, I think at the university, but he's also indigenous and from a very small riverine community, and he lives in Iquitos on a national scholarship so that he can study. He's become a real leader on our team. And I don't know, it really, for me, it just tickles me to read these excerpts from their experiences of what these archival documents mean. So this is another photograph, and this is an excerpt from our team member, Susan Leiche. You want me to read it?
I got this one
Okay.
crossed out.
Got it.
Susan is one of our mothers. She's I think the last one to give, most recent one to give birth. Yeah. And so Susan joined with Christian. So she was not one of the anthropologists, but when she was going through, one of the vernacular collections is these photographs from this school, Sacred Heart. It's photographs of like different classes, different events. And the family I lived with in Iquitos was all daughters, and they had all gone to Sacred Heart over the years. So Susan writes, I'm Susan Leiche, a former student of the prestigious Sacred Heart School from Iquitos and a member of the MEEP team, dedicated to the digitization and preservation of historical and cultural material from Loreto, Peru. It is an honor to invite you to explore the fascinating Sacred Heart photography collection, a visual compendium that tells the history of our institution, founded in 1920. This school, directed by the Sisters of the Order of Franciscan Missionaries of Mary, was intended for the exclusive education of women at a time of great development in Iquitos. During those years, Iquitos stood out as a progressive town with deep draft shifts connecting with the United States and Europe, urban trains, and the first automobile circulating through its streets, all of this at the height of rubber exploitation. The Sacred Heart photograph collection is a window to historical moments capturing the essence of our institution and its impact on the community. I invite you to discover these images and immerse yourself in the history of our beloved school, a legacy that lives on thanks to the dedication of those who keep its memory alive. So I want to contrast this with Werner Herzog, the fornication, and she's saying, no, actually, like, this has been a school dedicated to the education of women in a progressive era, at a time where Iquitos had the first car in Peru. So again, we have these narratives of Amazonia, but it's all people from without speaking on it. And when you come into these archives, and especially training the young people, you see so many fascinating counter narratives emerge, And so I think like the girls' school and this progressive education is a great example to kind of push back against the fornication and the jungle and, the difficult to conquer. Like, no, actually, if you ask anyone who lives there, you hear quite a different story.
Okay, so the other thing that is there's been a lot of unexpected things that have happened during this project. I've been doing it for almost 4 years now. And it's been one surprise after another. But one of the most delightful surprises has sort of been this team empowerment, which we've kind of encouraged along the way. But these are some images of our team, getting comfortable with the equipment. They were having some issues with the camera. And so one of our local team members had a friend who's a photographer come in and show them some tricks on the computer. And this is some of our, Margarita here is one of the metadata leads, and she's teaching the rest of the team how to do metadata, because in the first instance of our project, we just had 2 people doing metadata, and then we thought, everybody can actually do some of this metadata if we just teach it to them. And so these are all sort of transferable skills that these young people are getting as a part of this project. And you can see Susan's here with her baby, recently born. And so they've really become a team in all ways that one becomes a team, including conflicts. We have conflicts all the time, interpersonal conflicts. We have long Zoom calls where we try to sort out what the conflict is. I've learned a lot about conflict management just by working with these young people who, Susan in particular is always the one who's like, Amanda, it's okay. We're supposed to have conflict. We're working together all the time. It's natural. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I get very anxious about the conflict. So they work together in a lot of ways, and they do have differences among themselves, and they do have a lot of conflicts, and yet they're this really beautiful team. And so this was last Christmas, I think, is that right? In Peru at Christmas time, it's really common to have what's called a chocolatada, which usually involves bringing hot chocolate to a small town, often with entertainment and maybe some school supplies or some other gifts. And our team wanted to do a chocolatada as a team building experience. And so they reached out to Sydney and I and said, you know, would you guys be willing to fund this? We really want to go and do this. Anyway, I could tell you more about this, but it ended up being a really positive experience for the whole team. They went to a town called San Joaquin de Omagua. Is that what it's called? I think so. And they had a lovely afternoon with all of these children. And then in the wake of this, when we switched over to the British Library grant, and also sort of because they're not exactly, our team isn't really part of the Biblioteca Amazónica, they're sort of the separate entity. And so I encouraged them to kind of create a team name for themselves, and they came up with this idea of Isula Digital, so digital Isula. Isula is a kind of ant in the Amazon. It actually has a really strong bite. Don't want to get bit by Isulas. It's like, I forget the name of the tree that they usually are under, but you can hit the trunk and then they just all come up from the ground. But it's also known as a hardworking ant, and so that's why they chose this name for themselves. And this is, if you don't speak Spanish, you won't understand this, but I just want to show you part of this social media post that they created to explain the work they do, and they're pretty good images, even if you can't understand the Spanish.
En Isula Digital estamos comprometidos con la conservación de la herencia cultural de Loreto. En este video te presentamos a nuestro equipo, un grupo de apasionados dedicados a preservar y digitalizar nuestra historia. Recibimos material histórico y cultural de la Biblioteca Amazónica, un recurso esencial que nos conecta con nuestras raíces. Nuestro trabajo incluye el escaneo.
If you would like to follow them on Instagram, they're at Isula_digital_IQT. Another sort of empowerment.
En Isula Digital estamos.
This is one of our team members, Pierina, who is an anthropology student at the National University, registered the team with the Ministry of Culture as digital or as cultural patrimony preservers. And so now they have access to all sorts of workshops and professional development opportunities that they have been taking advantage of. And through this Ministry of Culture registry, they actually gave a presentation, a public presentation in Iquitos about the work they were doing. And they had sample, this is a contemporary newspaper, La Región, but they were just using it as an example to show sort of what are the skills and steps that are involved in digitizing. And this is them giving their talk.
Just one quick thing. And I think like these projects, Modern Endangered Archives, they do important work of cultural preservation, right? But I think kind of going back to this notion of mothers, you know, part of what Amanda and we understand there's also some problematic aspects to the work. We're taking these images, we make them publicly accessible. They're probably more accessible to people in places like San Francisco. And so this is something we've grappled with a little bit, but I think what we kind of keep coming back to is at the end of the day, the team has become their own thing, sort of like you raise your children to be independent from you. Isula is Isula. We hope they will continue, they want to continue to do the work. So if you have projects in Latin America, you can hire them. But I think the most important is we're excited that the material has been archived and there's metadata, but I think like I think what we're both a little bit more proud of is the fact that there's this team who has different skills that they can then pass on to people on the ground, right? Which is kind of then an unexpected aspect of the project that I think has been really important and is sort of like speaks to the sort of mother work, like caring for an archive. The care work is a kind of mothering, right? But then it's also, there has to be guardians of these materials and people who look out for it and learn to recognize how important vernacular materials are. And so I think one of our biggest successes in the project is that we've trained a fairly diverse group to do so.
So we're going to close soon here, but we just wanted to add, since it is a book club, that one of the things that has sort of nurtured our collaboration with each other is this shared love of places that we have, of course, shared love of Iquitos in particular, and also a shared love of books. And these are some of the books that we've sort of read together in our own book club of sorts. I don't think, unfortunately, only the middle one, as far as I know, is available in English if you're interested. It's called in English, The Three Halves of Mojo and Other Wizards of the Upper Amazon. And this is the book that I study in my book and that brought me to Iquitos originally. It's a sort of novel, memoir, autofiction, yeah, I'm not sure how to classify it. Nobody is, but it talks. Cesar Cabo has these ayahuasca experiences with Manuel Cordova, and it's sort of become recommended reading for ayahuasca lodges in the Iquitos area, and it's a very fascinating book. And then Hostal Amor, which is by Cayo Vasquez, who's a local. Cesar Cabo is from Lima, but his father is from Iquitos. And then Francisco Izquierdo Rios, who is sort of compared to Jose Maria Arguedas, if you know his work. He's sort of the Amazonian Jose Maria Arguedas. So yeah, these are some of our favorites.
They all push back against that Amazonian anaconda narrative. They're kind of much more like vernacular stories of life in very, very, very different books, but they're some of our favorites. So we wanted to leave them with you as fellow bibliophiles.
And then we just wanted to close with this sweet image of Father Joaquin. He just died 2 years ago, I think, shortly after I had been there, actually. And this is just, I don't know what this event is, but he just looks so happy and the center of attention. And you can just tell how loved he is in this photograph. So we wanted to close with this image of him. Despite our difficulties with the priests, we also have a lot of respect for them.
He never gave us any problems.
He never gave us any, yeah. And then we just have this acknowledgement slide with all of our team members on it, both present and past. We've had a lot of rotation in and out because people get jobs or move on to graduate school in some cases. And then we, of course, want to thank UCLA and Rachel Deblinger in particular from the Modern Endangered Archives program, and also the British Library Endangered Archives program. And then if you want to learn more about what we've been doing, here are some links that I think you said you would share the slides maybe. Or...
I can share. Yeah, this recording will be available.
Okay, yeah. Great. Yeah. And then thank you so much for your attention. And yeah, we'd love to answer any questions that you might have.
And Kevin's going to circulate a sign-up sheet if you want, as the collection becomes more publicly available. UCLA is kind of polishing up parts of it, but you can look at the collection. And so we'll send this around if you guys are interested in learning about what we do at the project. And I think we can probably open it up to questions.
Yeah. All right.
I'm going to grab a little more water.
Yeah, do it.
More of a voice.
So do we have any questions here in the club rooms? Jacob?
How frequently would you go physically to Iquitos? Or was it just the one time and then it was all long distance? Like, what was that?
So we took the first trip together, and then it is such a long journey. It really takes 24 hours for me to get from San Francisco to Iquitos, and I arrive exhausted. And so after the first trip, we decided that we were going to take turns. And so Sydney went down, or I don't remember the order of who went, but
you went yourself and I went by myself. Yeah.
yeah, we've each been a couple times, or I've been twice or something by myself. I can't remember. But yeah, originally our plan was to go every 6 months. And, you know, it's kind of, sometimes it's hard to explain like why we have to go, but it really is necessary for us to be there. Both because we have to sort of massage some of the relationships that can otherwise get a little bit knotted. And also because, I mean, our team members, again, they're just young people that have kind of learned these skills on the fly. And so sometimes, you know, on my last trip, I went down and they were missing, you know, hundreds of files. And I was like, where are these files? Well, I know you digitize, like, why are they not here? And it's sort of like a lack of familiarity with all the multiple ways of archiving. And so I literally had to find the files myself. And that was something that they were just in a weird place on the computer. But that's just something that, yeah, but I haven't been, the last time I was there was last January. So this is the longest we've been without going. So it's been more than a year. And I'm going this summer in July, and I'm actually taking my whole family with me. So my kids will finally get to go and meet everybody. Yeah.
We also had them working on Macs, and there's just not a ton of Apple support there. At one point, I was down there and they said the only person who knows how to fix Macs is the owner of this Chinese restaurant. So we had to go to a Chinese restaurant, into the kitchen, ask for the owner. And I don't know how, but it's the only person who fixes Macs in Iquitos at the time.
And then Chino.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's stuff like that. I had to get a receipt because at that time we had to submit receipts for MEAP. So the receipt was from his Chinese restaurant describing the services.
Another question here in the club rooms?
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Was your project impacted by the cyber attack on the British library systems?
Oh,
you want to repeat the question?
Oh,
please?
yeah, sorry. Was our project impacted by the cyber attack on the British Library? Not directly. I think that happened right before we started with them, but indirectly in that there was some issue with the Excel that we use for the metadata. And yeah, I mean, it was very minimal, I would say. They continue to have sort of personnel issues, I think, as a result that sort of minimally impact us, but no, thankfully not. Yes.
Well, Brett and then CJ.
So how much of the archive that exists there has the team been able to digitize? Is it still like a long way away? Are they
Yeah, so
planning to move into other archives after this?
So the question is, how much of the actual archival materials have been digitized from this archive? 5%? I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot more. It's just the funding's limited, you know, and so.
well, I mean, one thing I should say is both this Arcadia Fund, both through UCLA and the British Library, prioritizes primary materials that are not available elsewhere. And so the library has a lot of amazing things in it. I mean, actually the primary, yeah, there's lots of primary materials that haven't been digitized that aren't available elsewhere, but if anyone knows any philanthropists
Yeah.
that would like to support this initiative, yeah, there's so much more to
Yeah.
digitize. There's also, this is sort of a repository for personal collections from the region. And
Yeah.
so, you know, when anthropologists died, like while we were there was an anthropologist who had died, and boxes and boxes of his materials were there in the library. So we've digitized about 2,000 plus photographs, and there's probably 10,000 more. And they're incredible photographs. Yeah, we haven't even scraped the surface. The nice thing about these grants is that, as was mentioned in the beginning, the digitizing equipment has to stay locally. So although the funding that we had to pay them has sort of run out, the church can organize and have other people digitizing materials for their own repository.
CJ, do you have a question?
Yeah, that was partly what I wanted to ask. I wanted to thank you too for taking back Amazon as a reality.
Yeah,
And I wondered if you heard any input from the people there about what they thought about this man who tried to wrestle a steamship over the top of a mountain.
The question is, yeah, you know, what did we hear about Herzog in the I mean, it's funny because it is a touristy town. It's a little bit less so since the pandemic. There was the tourism economy was deeply impacted by the pandemic. It's just sort of starting to, when we went down in May 2022, we didn't see that many travelers, and then when I went back in January, it was a little bit more. But there's a whole like tourist scene in Iquitos that is like Herzog-esque. So there's like El Fitzcarraldo is one of the restaurants on the main Malecon, the how do you call it, like the boardwalk. And there's like, you can go and see the place that Herzog stayed, or Mick Jagger was one of the original people cast in the film, so you can go see where he stayed. And yeah, there's a whole sort of tourist itinerary that revolves around the film, but I think it's, I mean, I don't know, the friends of ours that we have, they just kind of think it's funny. I think it's not, you know, they don't take it very seriously.
And what's interesting is that, like in Lima, which is the capital, a lot of people I know, you know, women, I know middle-aged women, when they would go to Lima for school or for work, and they would say, oh, I'd get to Lima, and people would say, do you step over snakes when you go out of your room? And they were, so I think that imaginary is like, it persists even within in country.
Yeah.
You know, people have these ideas about like, oh, the Amazon. But once you're there, you know, people are kind of like, that's what people think of us. But like, clearly when you're there, it's, you know, very loud motorcycle traffic, you know? So I think, yeah, they think it's a little goofy, but I think most of them have not seen Fitzcarraldo. They're just familiar with the restaurant Fitzcarraldo's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a clarification here for a question on Zoom. So the archive is still taking new donations of material?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are still coming in.
Yeah. The archive is still getting new donations. Yep. Absolutely.
And part of the archive does include personal papers.
Mhm.
Is
Yep.
there organizational records, like other things
Probably of the church.
of the church?
So again, like part of the history of that region, there wasn't a ton of kind of state presence, like national government presence. And so the church was often an organizing political body, like build a new bridge, so in the collection of photographs, there's a lot of organizational records of buildings and bridges. But like there was other archives in Iquitos at the Ministry of Tourism and at the regional government also that burned in a fire. So those records tend to be stored in more government offices. And this was more vernacular stuff and cultural events. And so I think if they continue to get collections, it's more people who give the vernacular collection. Someone passes away. Yeah.
Right, one more question here in the club rooms, or we'll wrap up. I have a question for you in the club rooms. If you've lost your gloves, I have them. Okay, great.
Thank you.
There are some questions in the Zoom that I'll send you.
Okay,
You can
great.
kind of answer them later.
Sure.
If you are joining us on Zoom and you want to be added to the list to get updates about the project, you can just put something in the chat, put your name and just put your name. I have your email address. Just put your name in the chat and I'll be able to add you to the list of folks who are going to be getting updates about the project. And if you're here in the club rooms, there is a list that's going around and we'll add you to the list of updates, frequent updates about the project. So that's it for our program.
right.
Please join me in thanking our speakers, Amanda and Sydney.
And I think also for those who are joining on Zoom, would there be a way for them to sign up? Could we send them like a?
Yeah, we will send out an email to everyone to thank them for coming. And if
Okay.
they didn't come, sorry you missed it, but here's how to sign up.
Yeah.
To do
So
this.
those on Zoom too, we can add you to the list if you're curious about more updates on the Biblioteca Amazónica. Thank you all so much.
Yeah,
We really
thank you.
appreciate
And
it.
thanks to the American Trust for the British Library. I'm off camera, so you're getting this voice from off camera, but that's okay. American Trust for the British Library for co-presenting this event this evening. And thanks to you here in the club rooms and on Zoom for bearing with us at the
Yes.
beginning there with some technical difficulties. If you are interested in registering for any book club programs, you can do that online at bccbooks.org. Or you can sign up in the emails that you're probably getting from the book club now. There's always a register link in there. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. If you're here in the club rooms, get home safely. If you're already home safely, congratulations. Be well and take care of yourself, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.